Hello and welcome to part 2 in our series on transactional analysis. I happen to be recording this on the coldest day of the winter. You might even hear icy rain falling on the roof. And that would actually be more appropriate if we were doing part 4. TA is all about games people play, roles they put on one another, scripts, and all about breaking out of those scripts. And I just want to warn you that when you try to break out of a script, which we need to do, be prepared for bad weather to break upon your head, because others don't like that, and it takes some courage. But that's all in the future. We come today to part 2. You remember in part 1, we saw that we are a single, united human being. I represented us by an egg, but that within the united, integrated human being, we are 3 in 1. There are 3 recognizable voices inside each one of us. They're called the parent, the adult, and the child voice. Now, the parent voice we saw was divided into 2 sides, nurture and discipline. And we collect those voices from our childhood, from all sorts of places, largely our parents, but other authority figures, teachers, ministers. I said even Father Christmas. Notice the word Father Christmas. He's a parent figure. And like all parent figures, he has 2 sides. On the one hand, I will give you presents. That's the nurture side. But on the other, make sure you're a good boy, or you may not get presents. That's the discipline side. And when these 2 inside us are in good balance, I have a sense of structure in my life, and I have a sense of security. If they're not in good balance, then I find myself dominated or helpless. And so we come to the child voice. Now, the child voice is that voice inside me. It's my internal reaction to events and circumstances that come upon me. It's my gut reaction. I feel it from down there. It's emotional. It's made up of a huge body of emotional data that was collected in my childhood. Things that went well, things that went badly, memories, and the way I reacted to them, it's all stored up. And it makes a kind of database from which I react to things. When emotion dominates reason, then the child is in control inside me. When emotion dominates reason, then the child inside me is in control. That sometimes is a good thing, but quite often is not a good thing. And I repeat, we can change. Change is not easy, but it can be done. And so the child voice. Now, the child voice is like a mirror image of the parent voice and comes in 2 sides. I've chosen to call those 2 sides joy and pain. Now, it's tempting to call those positive and negative. That would be incorrect, because either of them can be negative and either of them can be positive. I need an ability to experience joy. I need an ability to experience pain. It's a very positive thing to be able to experience pain. The terrible disease of leprosy, after all, is actually an inability to feel pain. And that's what causes all the trouble. And so the joy side gives to me all sorts of wonderful gifts. The gift of laughter, the gift of adventure, the gift of wonder, the gift of spontaneity, the gift of intimacy. These things are of such value. I really need them in my life, and it's amazing how quickly they develop in a child. I've just recently acquired a 4th grandson. They say that a son makes a man out of his father, but a child out of his grandfather. I can identify with that. Just have a look at this little video clip at how well the sense of laughter and the sense of fun has developed already by the age of 6 months. Now, that's a wonderful thing to look at, isn't it? It's very difficult to define where the sense of fun and absurdity comes from that he's already acquired. But just to see someone totally overcome by laughter and amusement coming right out of his belly. It's a lovely thing to experience and to see. If I don't have these things of laughter, adventure, wonder, spontaneity, and intimacy in my life, I become a very sad person. I become very limited. There's no adventure, therefore I don't experience new things. I'm unable to worship. If you don't have a sense of wonder, you can't worship. There's no spontaneity. Everything's predictable. You know exactly how this person will respond. And they frankly become quite boring. And worst of all, they become very isolated people, because it's the child in me that gives me the ability to form close bonds and intimacy, sometimes without asking too many questions. And so the joy side is obviously something that must not die in me as I grow older, and sadly in some people it does. And then the pain side, not negative, tears, anger, despair, sadness, grief. These are essential tools for every person to have. And of course, a child has those very early on. Initially, he cries simply because he's hungry or something. But again, watch my grandson. By the age of 7 months, he's developed the ability to cry and feel despair and fear at quite interesting things. I was singing to him one day, and he didn't mind my falsetto voice, but he certainly objected to my Paul Robeson voice. Take a look at this. Isn't that delightful? Please don't report me to the Society of Prevention of Cruelty to Children. But there it is, by the age 6 months, he's learned to express fear, unhappiness over not just physical discomfort, but for some reason doesn't like one voice over another, and that's healthy. If a child doesn't have access to things like fear, he becomes very vulnerable. And we need to fear certain things to know when to run away and when to react. If a child doesn't have access to anger, he becomes a victim because he doesn't have that natural ability to rise up and fight. And there are times when we need to do that. If he doesn't know how to be sad and to despair and to grieve, well, as an adult then, I don't know how to deal with loss. And life is just such that it throws loss at me all the time. And if I don't know how to deal with loss, I become stuck. And we talk about people become stuck in grief. But not just grief for someone who's died, grief for anything that we've lost. And when someone doesn't have access to anger and doesn't have access to grief and how to grieve, they can become very vulnerable to depression because they feel they can't help themselves and they're stuck and they're helpless. And so I need to assimilate these childhood behaviors into my life to be a healthy human being. On the other hand, of course, if they become too dominant in the adult, then you see a grown-up demonstrating childish behavior. We've all seen this often. We've all done it often. But you see adults involving in tantrums, in sulking, in slamming doors, in not talking. Silence is a very childish thing. We say silence is violence sometimes. One of the things we do when we're in our childish voice is we globalize things. So I have a fight with you, and instead of dealing with the thing that we're fighting about, I say, I'm a useless person. And now I've globalized that into something very much bigger, which of course is unhealthy. In other words, if I'm not careful, I end up reacting in adulthood as I used to react in childhood. And that's not appropriate on an ongoing basis. And so when reason is in control, the adult is working. When emotion is in control, the child is in control. Now, we have noticed that when people have difficult upbringings and their parenting was not adequate, they can fall into one of three categories of child behavior, a kind of script that they fit into. And these three are called the helpful child, the hurtful child, and the helpless child. And if you're really honest, you might find that you fit into one of those categories. I remember a family where various traumas had taken place, and I ended up in teen years dealing with the three children. And you know, those three children fell very neatly into those three categories. The oldest was the helpful child. The middle one was the hurtful one. The youngest one was the helpless one. And the one I actually found hardest to help was the helpful child, because they were so good. They were trying so hard to be good. The easiest one to help was actually the hurtful one, because at least that one had access to her own anger. And so we can fit into a role, one of these three, and then we behave that and act it out as we grow into adult life. And it becomes a script that needs to be broken out of. And so we come to the adult voice. Now, the adult voice is actually by far the easiest of the three to describe. It doesn't have two sides to it. It's really quite simple to describe, although not nearly as simple to put into practice. The adult voice is the voice of reason. The adult voice talks in a calm tone of voice. You can hear when someone is talking in the adult voice. There's a calmness. They're thinking things through. They feel emotion, but it's under control. When emotions are under control, the adult voice is operating. When emotions dominate, the child is in control. And so the adult voice can feel emotion, but isn't dominated by it. The adult voice is the voice that willingly receives incoming information, including criticism of themselves, and evaluates it. Is this accurate? They seek reality. And having discovered and decided what is reality, then they look for rational, sensible solutions. They're unthreatened. The adult voice is unthreatened. I can hear criticism of myself. I know it will, some of it will be valid. I know some of it will not be valid. I'm not threatened. And equally, I'm not threatening. I don't use threat. That's a parent or a child thing. The adult doesn't threaten. He doesn't tell people what to do. He gives suggestions, he gives an opinion, but he leaves the other person some freedom. It's estimated that the adult voice begins to come into operation around the age of 10 months, very early. And it's important for parents to nurture that voice, and tremendously important for us to nurture it ourselves, because the adult voice can really be shouted down by the child or the parent voice if we're not careful. But the essence of growing up is in fact learning to operate out of the adult voice. Carl Jung suggested that doesn't truly fully happen until our 40s, and then it's not automatic. He said maturity is the prize of the 40s. Well, I think you can get very mature people younger than that. You can also get very immature people older than that. I once heard it said that growing old is mandatory, but growing up is optional. And the question of hanging on to my adult voice, letting it control the parent and the child within me, is in fact the essence of growing up. And so there we have the three: the parent, the adult, and the child. It has been said that the parent voice is something that is taught. I learn it from parents, teachers, older brothers and sisters, Father Christmas. It's a taught voice. The child voice is a felt voice. It comes from a host of things that happened and what I felt about them in my childhood and how I responded to them. The adult voice is the thought voice. It's what I think out, and I'm rational. That's the adult voice. The key to all of this is the word tone. I can say what on paper would look like adult, but when you listen to the tone I say it in, it's not adult at all. And you can, as I said before, tell which voice a person is using. Even if you don't know the language they're using, you can tell from the tone and the face and the body language. And if I were to ask you to draw up a list of adjectives to describe the tone of the parent voice, the list is huge. Authoritative, compulsive, dictatorial, authoritarian. There are just so many of those words. And so with the child, there are many of those words: sulky, pouty, and so on and so on. But to the adult voice, there are just a few: calm, reasoning. That's the adult voice. And so we have the three. How do they interact? Well, let us go back to what we said in part 1, that we are made in the image of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. One being, integrated, and yet three distinct personalities. The Father, of course, brings everything that is good about fatherhood, of authority, of nurture, of discipline, the fatherhood of God. I've been reading the book of Deuteronomy lately. Some people have the mistaken idea that the Old Testament is all about rules. Just have another read of the book of Deuteronomy. You will be amazed at how much nurture language there is. As far as I can tell, I didn't count fully, there are an equal number of nurture words: I love you, I will give you a land, I have chosen you, as there are discipline words: you must. The fatherhood of God. God the Father is the perfect parent, fully and totally balancing nurture and discipline. And then you get the Holy Spirit. In the best sense of the word is the child voice. The Holy Spirit gives us energy and life and excitement and even fun in the spiritual life, is the energy. But the Son, who's the equivalent of the adult voice, is always the mediator. The Son always mediates with the Father on our behalf. There is one mediator between God and man, the man Jesus Christ. The Son even mediates on our behalf between the Father and the Spirit. In the last night before Jesus died, he said, I will ask the Father, and he will send the Holy Spirit. And so within the nature of God, mysterious as it is, we can discern these three voices, and particularly that the Son is the great mediator. So it is within us. The adult voice is the mediating voice. It is the key to change. It's the voice that negotiates between the parent and the child. Because the parent and the child are often at odds, as old people and young people are quite often at odds. And neither the parent nor the child is a satisfactory guide to life. And the adult is the voice that negotiates and mediates between them. It doesn't try to shut them up, because there is time when the parent voice is fully appropriate. There is time when the child voice is fully appropriate. It's a very sad thing when a grown-up person can't really laugh, can't really let down their hair, can't really get angry, can't really get sad. Those are very sad things. But the adult keeps it in control. And there are times when the adult says, that's enough of that. Now we will go to something more reasonable and something more calm. Neither the parent nor the child is a satisfactory guide. The adult is the mediator, and the adult is the key to change. If, as I've been talking, you've become aware that your child voice or your parent voice is actually a problem, the key to changing it is through your adult voice. And I believe we can, with the help of God, with the help of Jesus, the great mediator. It's possible to change. Now, in part 1 and 2, we have simply looked at how we are made. That's just me. In part 3 and 4, we will see how this works out when I start relating to other people and their parent and adult and child. And that will be really interesting.